And Katie's still highlighted, is that right?
It's okay. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Okay. We're ready, guys. Yep. We need to start over with my comments, though. You want to do that first? Yeah. Good evening, District 95 community. This is Dr. Mark Wisniewski, your superintendent. I apologize for the delay. We had a little bit of some technical difficulty getting us going, but we think we're all good now. This is a formal board meeting. I'll ask in a moment that the school board president, Scott Encher, would open the meeting. I wanted to let you know that this is being recorded and will be made available if anyone could not attend this evening and wanted to watch once it's posted to our district website. So with that, Mr. Encher, if you'll open the meeting. Make sure I'm not muted.
Mrs. Mulcrone, Mr. Wood,
Here.
and Mr. Encher.
Here. Okay, before we get started, do we have any motions? Roll call, please.
Dr. Zatulski, Mrs. Garvey, Mrs. McAteer, Mr. Wood,
Aye.
Mrs. Mulcrone, Mrs. Jordan, and Mr. Encher.
Aye. Okay, we have one slip for public comment, and we also have a public comment from. Yes. So just a general statement for the people here. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes. And for those watching online, if you have a comment or a question, please direct that and send an email to Dr. Wisniewski. That's the best way to effectuate that. As he said, don't comment in this, or he said the comments are off for this. Okay, so just send Dr. Wisniewski an email with respect to that. So for our first public comment, Leah Isaac, please, I think, have them up there, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, I'm too short for the camera. So, sorry, I'm short. Okay, so thank you guys for allowing me a couple of minutes here. I was hoping for after the presentation so much. Sure, I was hoping to have time after the presentation. Hopefully my questions would be answered. So I apologize if these seem redundant, but I just have some general questions for the board members. Just more in general, if we are going back to an in-person or a hybrid program, will we have the opportunity as parents to choose an all home-based learning option? For example, for myself, like I have diabetes and both of my 2 children who attend Brook Park have health concerns and would not be safe to attend like a large group gathering. We've essentially been self-quarantining since March. And my daughter has had 2 surgeries since we have been home from school. And also, if our children do go back, speaking for my children's friends and their peers, are we going to have extra staff in the social work department, for example, to be able to help them with perhaps anxiety with going back to school, wearing their masks, being in a very sterile environment, being in an environment where they will possibly have to deal with loss or sickness or a teacher becoming ill, a peer becoming ill. These are all like very real things that we are possibly going to have to think about for our students. And then what about our substitutes? Like, will we have a stockpile of substitutes? And then piggybacking off of that question, how are we going to ensure that everyone who comes in the building is going to be safe, even our students? our teachers. I know that Dr. K emailed us and said that parents would self-report, but unfortunately, like our community and our country as a whole, like we have I'll wrap up. We have a daycare problem. Like, what about our working parents? Like, what if they have to send their child to school? I know Brook Park isn't a daycare, but for Brook Park, like our children have to go to school so our parents can work. So my concern is, what if we send our kids, people are being sent to school sick so their parents can work? So that's what my questions are. Thank you, board members.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Ned Carney?
Hello, board members, and those of you who are viewing online. I'm Linda Ned Carney. I am the president of the Teachers Association of Brookfield and LaGrange Park, that's known as TAB, and that's our union. And I'm here to say that the union supports the presentation that will be given to the board this evening. That's not to say that we don't have questions and concerns and some anxieties, but a lot of those are the same questions and concerns and anxieties that people have across the country as they're returning to work and making decisions about themselves and their families and their children. We're thankful for the very collaborative process where teachers were involved in creating these plans, and we continue to look forward to working in conjunction with the administrators on making the best of what is really an untenable situation for everyone. I think you will find that the plans are positive for both teachers and students and our community as a whole, and want to assure you that we will continue to do whatever we can to make this the best for the kids in District 95.
Thank you very much. Okay, and coming to our agenda item, review and approve the District 95 reopening plan. Dr. Kisnewski, take it away.
Thank you. I want to start out by thanking the district administrative team that is here this evening and will take part in this presentation. The work, the time, and the effort and the thought that has been put into this plan has resulted in a 45-page blueprint for returning to school. The purpose of tonight's presentation is to be more specific about that plan that has been shared with the school board, as well as outline for those that are watching this evening, as well as the board, what the next steps are in terms of a communication plan. So first, I wanted to overview our process. It started with collaboration, learning, and surveying to discuss and prepare for the different models that the state had asked us to prepare for. We did this through an administrative retreat to work through the multiple models and logistics to begin planning. We also used a number of surveys to gather information and data of both parents and teachers. We developed teacher committees, one, a remote teaching committee. We anticipate the need for remote learning at some point in time through this school year, and we know developing an enhanced remote learning model is necessary. We also developed an in-person / blended or hybrid committee, which would focus on both of those options as a model. That has brought us to this evening, which is a board presentation and request for approval. The next is to release to staff and parents a formal blueprint, which is prepared. And then the last step in this process is to continue moving forward with teacher administrative subcommittees to continue ironing out the minor details that are left in our plan. So very clearly, the recommendation after much discussion and collaboration is a blended half-day model that allows the option for a full-time remote learning platform. Are there any questions with the recommendation before I go on? Should be pretty clear. Wanted to quickly review why a blended model versus other models. We feel that a blended model allows for compliance with ISB safety guidance while allowing for some in-person learning that we know is critical on multiple levels for our students. Through a survey, District 95 parents selected a blended model over full in-person learning or simply a full remote learning plan in our most recent survey. A blended model allows for safer student and staff interactions than a full in-person model would. We believe that knowing this situation is fluid, a blended model allows for a migration from the next two extreme models. For example, if we have to go to a remote model, a hybrid model that already has students learning when they're not in person through some level of remote learning allows for a smoother transition. It also allows for the most parent choice in how their child receives instruction. One thing we wanted to be clear on is that when we chose a blended model, there was essentially two types of blended models. One was a half-day model in shifts where every student attends for a half a day every day versus other blended models, such as a child attending alternate days. We feel that this model of a half day, how do I go back? That this model allows for consistent student-teacher interaction. Whole day blended models, for example, have large gaps between when students are physically in school. It reduces the amount of time that students need to wear masks and remain seated, socially distanced, knowing that doing a mask all day long and sitting in the same area for a longer period of time is difficult, especially for our youngest learners. It allows for reduction of student movement and the avoidance of large gatherings, such as lunch in the cafeteria. It allows for more seamless access to special education, 504, and ELL services. It's difficult to deliver special ed services to a student if they're not in school on a daily basis. And last, and probably most critical, we feel that it allows staff to have eyes on students every day so that we can monitor their social and emotional status and provide social and emotional learning when necessary. In our model, we intend to allow remote learning due to a medical exemption, and there would be three reasons for a medical exemption. One is that a student has their own serious medical condition. Two, a person living in the immediate household has a serious medical condition. And lastly, a return to in-person learning will cause considerable anxiety for the student or family. It's important to note that while not indicated on the slide, that the district would not be collecting doctor's notes for any of the three following. It would be a self-reported exemption for parents. The blended plan or density reduction. And I'll stop there if any board member has questions. I should have stopped as we went through each slide. I think the questions will roll on the next couple of slides. So as we talk about safety being of paramount concern, we want to talk about four different aspects of safety. The first is self-certification, a requirement under the current guidelines, among other things such as mask wearing, is that we have some mechanism to either self-certify or do a self-evaluation of every student as they arrive at the school. Knowing that with our health staff, Self-certifying every student as they arrive at the school door is not a realistic option. We have chosen a self-certification process for parents. We have purchased an application called Qualtrics, in which will allow parents to self-certify that their child has met the required standards to report to school. That process will allow us to know what students have not been self-certified before the child enters the building. And if they show up without being self-certified, our nurse staff has a process in place to certify those students as they enter school. Students that do not self-certify will be done by our health office. For PPE, although there's a significant lack of specific guidance about how much on-hand PPE we should have, our health office has used federal guidelines and has used other states' models to work off of how much PPE we should have on hand. We will monitor and order additional supplies as needed. As of date, we have 24,000 masks on hand and 400 face shields for staff. Most notable in the safety first, and the one that probably garners most question, is the quarantining procedures. Any student who has a positive test will need to self-quarantine for 14 days, and that child's class will also stay at home for 14 days to self-quarantine. If a child simply shows symptoms of COVID, that child would quarantine for 14 days, but not the entire class. If there is an in-home connection to a positive test, for example, a child's sibling or a child's parent test positive, the child would be required to quarantine, and we would offer notification to the child's classmates, and the parents and teachers of that particular class would have the option to quarantine. Last is nursing office protocols. Wanted to let you know that our protocol calls for a clean office and a dirty office. The district is in the process and has found additional health staff that we will be hiring, that the board has recommended those additional FTE. And we will have a dirty office where kids that are being tested for symptoms go, and a clean office for an area where kids need their medication, their ice packs, their Band-Aids. We also have a process of to-go kits where nurses can and health aides can evaluate students at the classroom door versus students having to come down to the office, to the nurse's office, to help minimize the amount of travel in the hallways of students and the number of students going to a nurse's office. I'll stop there, and I'll take any questions about safety. And all I'm going to ask, just as I'm navigating here, I see me trying to mute myself and you unmuting is going to be difficult for me to navigate. So I'll just repeat the question. Rebecca, if you just want to ask, I'll repeat it. Yes. So to repeat the question, if you could not hear it, it's a confirmation that if there is a positive test, the child and the rest of that classroom would self-quarantine. If it's only a symptom, only the child would self-quarantine. But if that symptom eventually turns into a positive test, then that would then kick in an entire quarantine for that entire class. I'm going to introduce Christine Lebar, who is our lead health nurse, to help answer these questions.
So if they'll be so if a student has symptoms, they'll be sent home, they have to quarantine. In addition to that student, any siblings, I want to say, will also be quarantining. Anybody in that family will have to quarantine. The guidelines say that, I believe that you quarantine when you have a positive. So as of now, if there's symptoms, the whole class would not quarantine. But if there was ever a positive, then the whole class and the teacher would quarantine.
Okay, so if it's a week.
When that, as soon as we find out the student is positive, that class would have to start their full 2 weeks.
That clarifies it for me. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I had a question based on what you said there. So if a student has symptoms, they self-quarantine, and I thought you said their sibling
Yes,
also does.
everybody in that house.
Even though the sibling doesn't have symptoms, they
'Cause we're
still would be
monitoring.
required to quarantine.
Yes, because we're monitoring in case they do.
Would the classmates be notified that that someone has symptoms? And there's, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
it's not a positive, but, you know, parents might want to know, but also HIPAA comes into play. So like where.
So when there is a notification, it's never a student's name. It would just be someone has been positive for your child has been exposed. I don't know quite the wording of how we will do it.
But there would be a notification that somebody in close contact is exhibiting possible symptoms.
We could definitely do that. I don't know that we formalize that. We've been in discussions if we would do that or not, but that is absolutely.
I think our concern with notifying every time somebody has a symptom
is the symptoms are so broad. It's like
that the symptoms are so broad.
Almost
that,
everything is a symptom right now.
Right. That our notification process is when a child themselves, I mean, if the child has it, you're notified because you're going on quarantine.
Yeah.
Right. The notification comes in if the child then does not have it, but has been in close contact with a positive identification, meaning their parent has been a positive test. They've been in close contact with that positive test. That child and siblings are quarantined. That class is notified.
Yes.
Okay.
The notification is not triggered by a simple symptom.
So the notification comes when there's a positive test, but not a symptom.
Positive test of the child
Or someone in
positive
close
test
contact.
of someone in the child's household.
Okay.
Yep. It's an automatic notice, right? Yeah, that's what I was saying. Correct.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
You either have to unmute yourself or you repeat your question because I can't hear you. I did unmute myself. Yeah. Okay. No, I can hear you.
Mark, one question on the self-certification. You described how the nursing staff would if someone didn't self-certify when they got here. If they did turn out to be where they would not have successfully self-certified, would nursing then just treat that same as somebody who has flu or whatever, just contact parents that if it's a kid that can't be in the school, is it just treated the same way as it would be if a kid got sick during the day, that just reach out to the parents and.
Yep. The question is, what is the process for when a kid shows up not having been self-certified? The nurse's office will certify that student through a temperature check and a series of questions. We'll remind parents that they need to self-certify their student. The hope is that we can establish a process that we can identify those kids, and the numbers will be so small that we can do it before they even enter the building. This is where we are going to need the help of our community to self-certify their children so that we can have a smooth and seamless process for them to enter the building.
And if the staff finds that they have a fever, they have something that would render them uncertifiable, we don't just treat them, call mom or dad, or call, I mean, they're put in the dirty room and we
So if-
contact them to
Are you
come and
saying
get
when,
them.
if a student is sick, like in school?
Not just sick in school, if they come, they haven't been certified, and they come, and the nurse
Then we
says,
will-
he's got a fever,
Yes.
but mom and dad are already gone, he got dropped off.
Yes, they will be put into the dirty office, so to speak, because they have some type of symptom. They will be monitored and they will have to be picked up. And that's one thing we ask if parents are working and unable to pick up their students, that they try to have a backup plan for someone who will be available to pick up the students.
And on the quarantine issue, Mark, I'm assuming if someone gets quarantined, we just roll them into the remote learning process, that they just kick into that if they're not able to be here.
Yeah, so I think that is part of a model that is easily done at the elementary building, not so easily done at the middle school. But if a whole class has to quarantine, we will be prepared to have that teach, because just because they're quarantining doesn't mean they're ill. The teacher would then go into a 14-day remote model with both the morning session and the afternoon session, or they will go into a remote 14-day remote session of their morning, say for their morning, and an additional teacher will handle the duties for 14 days in the afternoon. What I can tell you is they will not roll in to an established remote learning group if a parent has chosen that model. Our intent is that we will be able to have enough students who choose the remote learning model that we can have cohorts of students that are assigned to an individual teacher. And if we have 25 in that group, I can't all of a sudden roll 14 more in and expect the teacher to be able to provide feedback and contact for now 39 students versus 25. Barb?
Because we'll have half of the students in the morning, half in the afternoon. If a student in the morning cohort ends up needing to be quarantined, is it the entire class morning and afternoon, or just that morning cohort?
Yeah, good question. I think at this point, if the child simply is quarantined for a symptom, the answer is no. If the child, him or herself, is tested positive, then the morning and afternoon session would quarantine. Katie?
On the self-certification, I think there's some concern of some people not self-certifying accurately. Would there be any other way to check that? I understand why we can't do it here when they get here, so we don't have time and we have to log. Could there be some sort of backup within the school? So because I think that's going to be parents are going to be skeptical of the accuracy. Just curious.
Yeah. You know, the direct answer is really no. The only way to have a backup to self-certification would be to monitor every child before they walk through the door. And I don't know logistically that that's possible. I think it's important for parents to know that the certification that's done at a one point in time, while it probably sounded like a really good idea when it was implemented, but the reality is anybody could be fine at 7 o'clock in the morning and not okay at 9 o'clock. And I think as people are making their decision about which model they want to use, they should understand that self-certification is the most fluid process we have at our disposal to be able to do this, and at the same time have a record of that certification, which is also the requirement. So imagine, even if we only have 400 students coming in a 15-minute window, how we would assess all students. And there is some concern about, it's not just taking their temperature, it's asking them if they've had any symptoms, and whether or not legally a 8-year-old can answer those questions. So doing it at the schoolhouse door is, in a sense, not realistic. A self-certification by the parent is the only way And the Qualtrics application allows us to collect that data and make it easy for parents to do. There will be a reminder email sent every single day saying self-certify your child. Me again?
So depending on how they
That's okay.
answer the questions, it will either say like, you're showing symptoms, you need to stay home, or no, you've hit some big key things, you need to follow up, you need to call 911, you need to follow up with your primary care. There is a real time, and in the administrative section, there's a real time feed that we see like X amount of people have certified, X amount of haven't. These are the ones who haven't, so that allows us to follow up with the students. Even after the reminder, if it's still, school hasn't started, we could, send another reminder. So there is follow-up though, depending on how they answer it, like you stay home or you need to go to the doctor. We are saying if you have symptoms or a fever, you need to stay home for 72 hours, fever-free, symptom-free, without medication. Does that answer your question? Yes. It will, I believe that if there's someone is referred to go get a test, that we would be able to see that, and then we could follow up with that.
So you're saying they're gonna self-certify, and it's 72 hours fever-free. So let's say, a kid has a fever on Monday, parent tries to self-certify on Tuesday saying they're fever-free. Is the app gonna track that and say, wait a second, it hasn't been 72 hours. Even if they're fever-free on Tuesday morning, they're supposed to stay home. Like, will the app give the reminder for that? Or is it going to be on the parents to just remember that that's the guidance?
It's going to be on the parents and then us in the nursing office to know that they reported a fever, they need to stay home for the 72 hours.
And if they report a fever, does that go to like the attendance office too? Like, is that the same as calling and saying they're sick today? That isn't like excused absence or whatever, however you classify it? Or do they have to say on the app there's a fever and then also contact for the?
I don't know that we've decided.
Yeah, there's some possibility that the app could act in addition to just reporting that you're self-certifying, and also serve as our absence method. But based on what we saw initially, I think if a parent is calling their child in because they are sick, we want that done through the attendance hotline like it always has been done.
And then just because you know how annoying I can be, I did want to say, like, if back to Katie's question about the skepticism about parents self-certifying accurately, we would still have the capabilities with the health professionals to, if someone is suspected of having a fever or something, we still would be able to take their temperatures in the building
Absolutely.
And send them down
And
to.
teachers do that all the time. If a kid just doesn't look well, and some teachers, they might say, he's not acting right, she's not acting right, can you just check them? And
so there is
they do have a fever. So yes,
sorts.
we're still here. We'll still be seeing students like we normally do. Kids are going to get sick during the day. We will be seeing students. So yes, we'll still be doing all our normal duties.
So obviously, parents can be very forgetful and willing not, I wouldn't want a system where they self-certify out of fear of, their child getting caught? Like, is there a means or a process of a parent calling in and saying, you know what, I completely forgot to do the temperature check. Can you do that for me? Like, is there some sort of process built in as a fail-safe so parents don't just go ahead and lie?
If a student is not self-certified, they will be pulled in the morning, and we will probably be following up with parents, like, listen, Johnny wasn't self-certified this morning, like, you need to do that. That needs to become a new habit.
Right. My fear is
But
that-
yes, they will be screened, they will be checked.
But could a parent call and say, I forgot to self-cert, like, I forgot to do the temperature?
We'll know that they didn't self-certify before they call, because I'll have a printout, I'll know in the morning by 7:45 who didn't certify. If they want to call and remind us, that's fine, but we'll know too.
All right. Great, we can get to the next slide. I want to just review some of the building cleaning practices. All buildings and ground staff will receive training on effective disinfecting protocol. We will use EPA registered disinfectants for combating COVID-19. The building and ground staff will be disinfecting learning areas daily after the AM group, and our GDI staff and buildings and ground staff will clean and disinfect each evening after the PM group. During the day, the building and ground staff will be wiping down high touch areas and bathrooms throughout the school day, and also restocking sanitizer and supplies. Students will be directed to sanitize their hands frequently and always upon entering, exiting a space. And specific cleaning protocols will be put in place to address any area where infected individuals may have been within our buildings. We believe that we can accomplish these building cleaning practices at least at the start of the school year with our current staff. Should we remain in a hybrid model for an extended period of time, I won't be able to maintain pulling certain staff from their normal routines on a long-term basis, and we'd have to explore expanding our GDI services. But at least initially for the first month or so, we can handle it with our current staff.
I have a question related to the sanitizer. If a classroom has sinks, I know it might be more disruptive, but could it be a possibility to hand wash instead of sanitize? Hand washing is actually considered in a lot of areas to be a little bit more effective than the hand sanitizer is. I'm not sure about schools, I have to be honest, but in other areas, it's considered more effective. So is that a possibility instead of just using hand sanitizer?
Can you mute?
Oh, sorry.
It is not possible inside the classroom, as while there are sinks in the classroom, you'll remember that it was several years ago that due to aging pipes, the sinks were dismantled in the classrooms, and there's just really no way to reconnect them. What I do want to let you know is that we've increased portable hand washing stations in common areas so that kids do not have to visit the bathrooms for hand washing. So we'll encourage hand washing when possible, but in light of the fact that none of the classrooms at Brook Park have sinks, with the exception of kindergarten, where we would encourage hand washing versus sanitizer or both, but Gross does not have sinks, with the exception of some classrooms that are specific and most likely would not be used as classrooms. For example, the art room. Okay, I'm going to move on. So transportation. Under the current guidance, the ability of District 95 to provide transportation is just not possible. Parents and guardians would be responsible for transportation needs of their children to school this year. We just cannot safely provide bus transportation at this time. We will be unable to make sure that all students have self-certified, for example, before boarding a school bus. Also, to appropriately social distance students on a bus, we'd have to increase our routes to 49 school buses, assuming a large number of students. We just cannot feasibly run the amount of routes we would need to social distance. However, it is important to note that if a student's IEP or 504 plan indicates that they should receive transportation services, we will still provide those services as prescribed by student's IEP or 504 plan. Okay. Wanted to let the board, and more importantly, we've put the slide in for those parents that are in the audience, whether it's virtually or in person, that there was, prior to the pandemic, options for after school and before school care, one through Right at School, which is our third-party vendor that would have been first being utilized next school year. And the second was the Brookfield Recreation Department. So right now, the Right at School program that was originally scheduled for after school is still slated to run. I am exploring with Right at School options of what additional services can look like within the blended model with RAS for those families needing care during the day. Space restrictions and stringent limits of the number of kids per space, regardless of the size of the space, is presenting a challenge to offering something within the blended model. What I can say with certainty, if it's offered, space limitations is going to restrict significantly the number of students that we can offer that to. The feasibility of the Brookfield Rec before school care program is being evaluated. We just began those discussions. I think it is a needed option, and our goal would be to make that work if we can do it safely. So that's our after school programs. So, teaching from a distance and still making a difference. We have the blended model and we have the remote learning model, two different models. And with that, I'm gonna invite Mike Sorensen, the 3-5 principal at Brook Park, to talk about the Brook Park blended model. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to be speaking about logistics, and these are items that are still currently being worked on. But the first one is it will be a cohort model, and that means that students will be staying with their cohort in the classroom. The tables, different seating areas will be moved apart at Brook Park to include the social distancing, and class sizes should not be in an AM or PM as high as 13. We can't give you those exact yet until we know the amount of students that will be at the blended model. So those are things that will be worked on once we have that information. The learning platforms. So when we are doing the remote portion of the day that Ms. King and Ms. Cannon will be talking about, we will be using K2 Seesaw to make it very consistent. And for 3-5, we will be using Google Classroom. This should make the process quite a bit easier for the parents and also for the students. Some of the other logistics that are being worked on and will continue to be worked on and will also be worked on with the teachers is the signage in the hallways, in the bathrooms, assigning doors that students will be entering and exiting. It changes things without transportation because we will be able to use both sides of the building, which up until this point has not been possible because Harrison Avenue has always been the bus pickup and drop off. So that will be changing things immensely, and grades will have certain doors that they will enter. We will keep with the consistency of 15 minutes before school starts, that the doors will open and the students will go to their assigned classrooms, which we've done now the last 2 years at Brook Park. Lunches, because we will have the half-day blended model, will be delivered to the students that are morning at the end of the day. And then the PM group will get them before they leave. So they would have them for the next day. This will be a process that, again, will be worked on to make it so our students are eating, because that's always important. There will be many students that would eat before they're coming, or the breakfast. One thing that would be a little bit different that is new is just like when we had half-day kindergarten, snacks will not be at Brook Park. So because of the 2.5-hour limit, there will not be snacks throughout the day. And then enrollment in our remote or our blended model will determine our staffing needs. So we do have to wait to see how many parents choose the remote option before we can say clearly this is what it's going to be. Because it could be 3 fifth graders or it could be 40 fifth graders. And that makes a big difference on how we would staff the all remote model. There are a lot more logistics that are being worked out, but our big first step was getting this plan out so we can continue to work on those things. Questions at all about logistics?
So as far as the playground, and in the morning as kids congregate, will that be off limits? How will?
Yeah, so even in the past, we haven't recommended the playground as really when kids get here, we've always wanted kids to come right into the building. So that would continue, that students would come right into the building. Ms. King will talk a little bit about the schedule. So it'll talk a little bit about what we're doing a little bit differently with like a mask break where we could possibly be outside. But we wouldn't encourage any kind of congregating outside. Other logistics.
Just a question. So all of the specials will be done in the classrooms?
Yeah, so Ms. King will talk about the schedule because specials will look completely different, and the organization of what the day will look like will look very different than it ever has because it's only the 2.5 hours. Megan. Correct. So when we go AM, PM, a survey will be sent out and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the option of it, we will keep siblings in the same. And we're seeing a lot more because we have many twins that parents requesting them to be in the same class, which is not typical for us, but that is something we would honor because that would even limit the cohort even a little bit more because you have a student from the same family. Other logistics questions? Next up is Miss Kathy Cannon, our Director of Teaching and Learning, and she will talk about what instruction is going to look like.
Okay, good evening. So with the instruction in the blended model, obviously the first weeks of school with the circumstances and having this new model, the focus will be mainly on that SEL component, student wellness, understanding routines, the differences and changes with what school will look like and the expectations. But in the blended model, for 2.5 hours, the in-person learning focus will be on literacy and math. So the reading, writing, and math will be what we focus on in school. The science and social studies will be reinforced through nonfiction texts, and that will be taking place outside of the in-person learning in the 2.5 hours at home remote learning. The specials, art and music, will also be part of the remote learning piece in the blended model, 1 time a week. And then PE for that physical education piece and activity for students will take place every day, but again, will be in the remote part of the blended learning model. The teachers will provide support and training for and model all of the platforms that we'll be using. Earlier, Mr. Sorensen mentioned Seesaw and Google Classroom. So while students are in school, we'll help to reinforce, model, and train so that they'll be able to be more independent at the at-home part of the remote piece of the blended model. Our specialists and coaches will be utilized in school and in the remote learning piece of the blended model to differentiate and provide support for reading and math as they do during the normal school year. And we'll be providing additional professional development days for staff to make sure they're comfortable with all the platforms we're using, the blended model, and then whatever other support they need to support students in this learning model. Does anyone have questions about the blended instruction?
How will the at-home learning be monitored? Like monitored by the staff?
So with the platform?
The at-home, yeah.
So the classroom teacher will be responsible for the in-person learning and planning of the remote learning at home. We'll be using those platforms that we mentioned consistently for students, and then helping to train the students to be more independent in their learning during the remote. We're simplifying, but obviously based on feedback from teachers and from parents, making sure that we can provide a more robust remote learning experience than we did in the spring. And we'll talk a little bit more about remote in the remote learning section. Yes.
So it says like science and social studies are reinforced through nonfiction text selections. What about our younger, like kindergarten, first grade, reading long texts, not exactly their strong suit at that age?
Sure. And it's not only through nonfiction text. That's just one way that we're going to support science and social studies in the classroom, but we'll also be providing science and social studies activities, but that will be the remote part of the blended model that will take place at home and not at school.
Sorry, just to follow up, when you say activities, like, let's say there's, a science experiment demonstration that kids should be getting some hands-on learning with. Are we considering like sending materials home with kids to carry that out? Or like, will parents be given a supply list ahead of time? Like, these are some of the things you wouldn't normally buy, but you might want to have around for next week's unit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, I do. So any of the lessons, science experiments, things that we'll be doing, we would be sending home the materials that are needed for those experiments and experiences for students. You won't need additional resources that I can think of outside of what you would typically get for your supplies. But yeah, anything that we would have done at home, we would be sending home. And a lot of the specifics of the instructional piece, you won't find a lot of details in the blueprint, and they're a little bit vague in the way that I'm saying them right now. But this is the piece in our next steps. We've been focusing so much on the logistics and the model, the blueprint, all of those things. The instruction piece is really in collaboration with our staff and teachers. So we have had a chance to meet with those committees, and we're working on the instructional piece. But now, once the model is approved, then we can focus and zone on more to the instruction, what it looks like, the day-to-day, what resources we need, what supplies we need, and what specifically those lessons and activities will look like in all subjects. Any additional questions? Okay, so next up is Kelly King. She's the K-2 principal at Brook Park, and she'll be talking about the blended model schedule.
All right, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and walk through a sample schedule. Both the first one we will look at is the AM in school, what that will look like, and then we'll switch to what the PM in school will look like. So if a student attends Brook Park in the morning, from, like Mr. Sorensen said, they can still go directly to their classrooms at 7:45. We will use a variety of doors for students to safely enter the building. Like Ms. Cannon mentioned, we will be focusing heavily on SEL, literacy, and math while students are in school with us. So every beginning of the day will be a morning meeting, which will focus on that social emotional learning, building relationships, having students have an opportunity to build community within their classrooms. Then we will move into a 45-minute math block. That's across all grade levels. Kindergarten through 5th grade will be in a 45-minute math block. Every grade level will also have a 15-minute mask break outdoor, with obviously weather depending. So if students are able to safely socially distance, we will encourage teachers to take their classes outside, take a walk around the building. We won't be allowing them to use the playground type of areas, so it won't look the same as a recess per se, but we know that students will need to build up stamina for even that 2.5 hours of wearing a mask, especially our younger learners, and they'll be taking that mask break. And then we have a 70-minute literacy block in every grade level, kindergarten through 5th grade, and literacy will encompass reading, writing, and then phonics for our younger students. Everyone will have a break from school from 10:30 till noon. So whether you attend school in the AM or PM, for this student who attends Brook Park in the morning, what their afternoon schedule would look like would be from 12 to 12:30, they would be assigned a daily PE activity. We believe in the importance of movement. We want to be really cognizant of how much time our students, especially our younger ones, are spending on screens. So we want to make sure kids are active and moving, and that's why PE is part of their daily rotation. The next part of their day from 12:30 to 1 o'clock will be a special, which will either be music or art. Again, all of our specials are incredibly important, but to keep it consistent, the classes and grade levels will be on a 2-week rotating schedule. So 1st grade would do music for 2 weeks, and then they would do art for 2 weeks. 2nd grade would be in art for 2 weeks and switch to music for 2 weeks, and down the grade levels we would go. From 1 o'clock to 1:30, whatever digital platform that the district purchases, we would dedicate that 30 minutes to help support any of the content areas. So whether that be literacy or math, that would be a time where students would be on a screen, that they would be completing work on our digital platform. Like Ms. Cannon talked about, science and social studies will be in that part of the remote learning. So there will be a 30-minute block in this sample schedule. It's dedicated to science. And then the end of the day from 2 o'clock to 2:30 is we currently have this in every grade level. It's the win time, or what I need, and that will be assigned by the teacher. So in kindergarten, we could be working really hard on letter sounds at the beginning of the year. In 5th grade, they may be working on a really cool project that it's time that they're working on that project. So that will be assigned by the classroom teacher, but it will be different for every grade level, and it could change every day, every week. Again, we really want to give students a more unique remote learning experience, so we really felt that it was important to build in that win time, even though we weren't having it with them in school with us. When we look at the PM in-school schedule, you'll notice that the times, like I mentioned earlier, are exactly the same. So from 8 to 10:30, this child is in remote learning. So their blocks are exactly the same. And then they have from 10:30 to 12 o'clock off of school. And then their PM school time is from 12 o'clock till 12:30. You'll notice that the end of the day says 2:25. Again, we want to give that 5 minutes to pack up, get ready, and then exit the building again through those assigned doors so that students are able to exit the building safely. Are there questions about the Brook Park schedule? Yes, Kyle.
So when students are doing specials remotely, music, art, are those specialists going to be available to answer questions potentially to support the students remotely? Like, will the art teacher or the music teacher have a schedule of Zoom meetings that kids can attend to ask questions or something of that nature?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the remote model, but there will be synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities in all of the remote options, if that makes sense. Because our music and art teachers and PE teachers are just dedicated to remote learning. So they would have opportunity to meet with students, answer students during the day.
And then the other question that I had as I look at these schedules, just one thing I'm thinking about is I see here 1 to 1:15 mask break. Is this just a sample hypothetical schedule? Because I imagine if the entire school is taking a mask break at 1 to 1:15, that's going to cause all sorts of logistical distancing things.
Yeah, that's another great question. So this, we are splitting the grade levels so that 3 of our grade levels will have math first when they come to school, and 3 of our grade levels will have literacy first. So that will stagger the mask break times. Because if you have math first, your mask break is going to be earlier because math is only a 45-minute block. If you have literacy first, which is a 70-minute block, that will push your math break to later.
So there will be essentially like an assigned time for classes and not just like teacher's discretion that could lead to classes interacting in the hallway and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to assign those times so that we can safely socially distance students in the hallways and then as well as outside so they're able to take the mask break safely. Katie?
I don't know if this is the time for the question, but I'm thinking of the reading and the group differentiation from Lit Lab all the way through our 5th grade readers. How are we going to handle that? Are we pushing in? Are we not differentiating as much during this time? Or if that's a different area, we can wait for that.
No, we can talk about it in this. So that's where our specialists, our reading specialists will be able to push into classrooms so we can still offer small group instruction. Due to class sizes, it may not be as close to the reading levels that we were when we were 25 students all in person and we could really differentiate those levels, but we will be working really hard to meet with students of similar instructional levels to meet their instructional needs. And that will be all pushing in. Students won't be moving to receive those services. Kyle?
I had a question. You had said before that science projects will still occur in school. So I'm assuming this is a relative schedule and that once every 2 weeks or so, there would be time adjusted so that a science project could occur in the classroom or some science interaction other than just the readings and things like that.
So science and social studies will typically be all in remote. Okay. What will be reinforced in the in-school part will be that reading and reinforcing of nonfiction texts of both science and social studies within the literacy block.
Okay.
Sorry, when you mentioned pushing in for like literacy and stuff and kids getting help at their reading levels and stuff like that, it made me think of like leveled readers and stuff. What's going to happen with classroom libraries and other shared materials? I mean, kids still need access to those things, but also theoretically anything that's shared should be sanitized. So how is that going to work? Is it going to be like do ebooks for their leveled readers, or is it going to be we have a way of cleaning stuff? between?
So we do have Blackline Masters of our reading intervention program, which we would be able to provide to students. We will not let students share materials. That's in the guidance from ISB. Kathy? Any other?
We did talk a little bit about that because we have a full room dedicated to a guided reading library with all the levels. So we could potentially utilize, we have enough books to provide the kids with their own books. And then they can be sanitized in between as they switch to new books before being reused again. So we do have in district enough books that way. And then in addition, our intervention service books that they could keep and take home and not even share. So for now, we do have enough resources that they will be sharing.
Any other questions about schedules at Brook Park? Yeah, Katie? No?
I know it's going to be more robust than what we had in the spring. Just some concern about PE, what with different living arrangements, different exposures to what kids can get out, that's going to all be, is it going to be, do you have any thoughts on how that's going to look for our students, or is it too early in the process to know what they're going to be?
Yeah, I think we still want to collaborate further with our PE teachers who will be delivering that. I think they already have started their wheels spinning on what may be best. One of our PE teachers is on one of our committees. So we definitely want to work with the teachers and staff more on how they can best deliver that model so it's more robust than what we had in the spring.
Just to piggyback on the book sharing,
yeah.
What about like math manipulatives? I am presuming we don't really have enough to give each kid their own little kit, but I don't know.
I believe we do have enough math manipulatives to give each child their own.
Yeah, so part of the Go Math program that we use, they have their individual workbooks each. They also were, we have a kit. So within the kits, we can make manipulative bags that are shared for the class.
Anything else? All right, next I'll introduce Ryan Evans, the principal at SE Gross, to talk about the SE Gross blended model.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to be talking with you about logistics and instruction. Then Jeff Tumpane will be talking about schedules. I'm actually going to shift it a little bit and say, let's get through logistics, instruction, and schedules first, and then I'll take questions because I feel like some of the questions are embedded in those 3 slides. The first thing at the middle school is that we'll get class sizes down to between 12 and 14, which allows for the physical spacing within the classrooms. There is a possibility of going to larger cohorts than the 12 to 14, but if we did that, we would go to larger spaces within the building. For those of you that are familiar, you know that we have rooms that are not traditional classrooms, but they are larger spaces. And so as we get to the nitty-gritty of scheduling, we might see that we need to expand that, but we would still keep the distancing within the classroom. Students will be in a cohort model as well, which is very different for us at the middle school. At the middle school, we have not operated in a cohort model in the past. Instead, students switched period to period to period to be with their specialist. That's what the teachers at the middle school are. They are not general in nature with that elementary certificate. They are more in line to the area that they're teaching. With that being said, we have come up with a way that the teachers will switch to the cohort classes. In that we will, and this is coming on the next slide, we will still be able to offer our 4 different levels of mathematics. We still will be able to offer our 3 different levels of ELA. Will it be a scheduling nightmare across the district to do? Absolutely. But we do feel confident that we can meet the children where they need to be, as we've done in the past, because that's most important for their growth. Intervention and additional supports, and this is similar between the 2 schools. It wasn't talked about yet, and Dean will get into it in just a little bit, but we will still also be able to offer intervention and additional supports to our IEP and 504 ELL students after our morning session and before our afternoon session. Jeff will go a little bit more into that with scheduling to give you an idea of what that'll look like, and then Dean will go deeper into it after we conclude. Enrollment in the hybrid and the remote models is going to determine our staffing needs. It is incredibly important that we know shortly where parents are at, whether they are going to enter remote learning or whether or not they're going to enter into this hybrid model, because we are going to have to shift things around to meet our students' needs. One of the things that we know is that we will be in a half-day remote model. And one of the things that it was important was finding that platform to deliver materials to students to organize and to communicate. Google Classroom will meet that need for us. So we will be making sure that all of our teachers are on that and that our students are well versed. I will say this is about 90% of our teachers and students are very well versed in it, but this will be the model at Gross to communicate in that form. Our in-person focus at SC Gross will be on ELA, the language arts, math, and science. That's what we will teach in person. We will teach the ELA, and you'll see this in the schedule. It will be in a block model, so it will get more minutes than math and science. By offering these 4 blocks, we are able to appropriately physically distance our students while also offering the instructional model that's best for them. You talked about science at the elementary and the experimentation and those types of things. Our science teachers are already in discussions about how do we make that work so that we continue hands-on experimentation with our students, because we know that's very important. And you said, could we send home things? We absolutely could, but it's going to become much more difficult at the middle school to do that with the things that we need and the materials that we have. So we believe that that's important to have here at school. Will there be cleaning that's involved in those things? Yes. Will there be purchasing that has to happen in order to allow us to make sure that that happens? Absolutely. But that's getting into the weeds and that's getting very specific, but we have those plans already started and in place so that we can offer these core subjects to our students in person. Again, we'll be able to offer where the student's at. That has been something that we've done for many years at SC Gross. We believe it's important that that student is challenged at the appropriate level for them and that they stretch from that level. In our cohort model, we do believe that we can continue to offer that to our students with our staff. The remote portion of the day will focus on social studies, and that will be daily. It will focus on an enrichment period. So those of you that have been in the district or had children in the district know that we offered a suite of electives for our students. We will not be offering all of those electives under this model. It is not possible to do that. They are too specialized to the locations that they would have to be taught. Might there be parts of it that come into this enrichment period? Absolutely. But we will be looking to have a staff member or potentially 2 staff members head up this enrichment model. We will then reapportion staff into other needed areas to make sure that the core is supported, to make sure, one of you had mentioned, what do we do about substitutes, right? Well, we may have staff on hand to continue to help with that because this is a new world for all of us. We will also offer health and wellness and physical education. This is where our SEL will be embedded, just as we do when we are in person. The specifics of that are going to be worked out by that team of teachers. However, we do have a model in place that would allow our students to have that on a daily basis. We know movement is important. Unfortunately, we can't bring them together in our spaces that we currently have to do that, nor do I believe that at this time we would put that over ELA, math, and science instruction when we have 2.5 hours to instruct our students. Our enrichment program will be school-wide. As I said, not all of those will be offered. What we will continue to offer in a remote model is band in Spanish. Will it look entirely different than it has in the past? Absolutely. But we know that these are things that our populations of students at the middle school take advantage of, and we want to continue to do that. There are schools that we've talked to that are trying to figure out how to do band in school. I can tell you that the conversations that I've had and that I've heard are ones that I would not want to bring up with you because I don't believe an in-person model is a safe model for band instruction. It's listed as a super spreader event. We don't want to do that, but we do honor it and we want to make sure that it's offered. So we will do it fully remote. Spanish as well. We know that we continue year in and year out to move kids to high levels of Spanish at Riverside Brookfield High School. We want to continue that path. However, in order to do that, we're going to have parents opt their students into Spanish instruction and stay with that. No matter what model we are in, they would continue with it. If for some reason we were to go all in as a district, so maybe a vaccine comes, you're going to continue Spanish out into the future. But this is something that for band in Spanish, you need to opt in and stay in for the year. It will be, right now we're saying it will be daily. Band probably will have to have a schedule where kids are working in instrument groups, so you might not get it daily as you did in the traditional middle school model. With all of this, I think Jeff and I, Jeff Tumpain, our assistant principal, and I look at it and we look at the schedules and we become cognizant of that a student could become overwhelmed by all of the different things. And we're going to put some protections in place to say, if you're taking band in Spanish, the enrichment portion is something you should really think about, and maybe you opt in a little later to start doing that until students and parents are familiar with this model. What we saw in the spring is that some students, an hour and a half and they were through everything. Some students 5 hours and they still weren't through it, right? Every student is a little different. We're cognizant of that and we want to make sure that we monitor it. So this is what we'll go with on day one. That doesn't mean that in 2 months, things may adjust from here based on the feedback that we're getting or what we're seeing. So that's the instructional model for SE Gross. Jeff's going to walk you through the day in the life of an SE Gross student, and then both of us will answer questions.
Thanks, Ryan. Good evening, everyone. We're looking at a AM schedule. So this is an example schedule of a student who would be in school in the morning. And so what you'll see is essentially 4 class periods over 150 minutes. So we're looking at 4 35-minute classes. Our language arts remains a block. And so it will remain a reading and writing period for the most part, and that would stay blocked together. The student would be with the same teacher for both of those periods. And then a student would have a 35-minute math period and a 35-minute science period. As Ryan mentioned before, we've eliminated passing periods. We do have 2 minutes in between classes as essentially a teacher passing period, where we're going to facilitate teachers who are moving from class to class as the cohort stays in the same location. From 10:30 until noon, we have a transition out of school. And so students are having lunch at that time. What we've built into the schedule is time for interventions. And so a student with an IEP, a 504, or related services would extend their day. And so that student from 10:30 till 11:10 would receive additional services like an academic lab or a guided study. A student who's in the afternoon session would receive those extra services from 11:20 until 12. And so they would start their day early with those additional 40 minutes of services, and then they would move into their PM schedule. To stick with this schedule, an AM student in the afternoon is working on remote for their social studies lessons through our TCI program, which we believe lends itself to working remotely. They would have health and wellness. And so for our veteran middle school parents, we know that we're 2/3 of the year in PE and 1/3 of the year in health. And so we would look to stay along those same lines. Potentially, we would increase the amount of social emotional learning that would happen through our health class. We also want to encourage kids to stay active. And so that would be a combination of both health and wellness along with activity, physical activity at home. Ryan talked about our enrichment opportunities, band and Spanish happening daily or close to daily, depending on the instrument that a student is playing. And those enrichment opportunities would be provided daily as well. Ryan and I have talked about a model where we don't start with our enrichment opportunities until the third week of the school year. And that's something that we're still working on. As he mentioned, we don't want to overwhelm students as they're getting back into the routines of being in school. And so it's possible that enrichment, band, and Spanish may not start until the third week of the school, but I think we want more feedback from parents and teachers before we lock that down. So now we're looking at the flip schedule. This would be a student who is in school in the afternoon and working remotely in the morning. Very similar again in terms of what they are responsible for from a remote standpoint. The arrival to school, as Mr. Sorensen said, will look different at both of our schools. We have 3 separate doors for our grades. Instead of a congregating area before school and after school, we would have students come into the building and directly into their first class as opposed to mingling outside together. So 3 different doors for 3 different grades. They would immediately come into their first period class. The day would begin pretty quickly. At the end of the day, in both cases, we have homework. This is something that we would talk with teachers about and prioritize some subjects over others and make sure that our teachers are on the same page as to make sure we're not overwhelming students between their remote work and their in-school work, in addition to homework that's happening as well. I think at this point, if anybody has questions about our logistics or schedule, the middle school.
On your, so say this was to stick with the PM schedule, will our middle schoolers have to check in at a certain time in the morning for their remote social studies or whatever the first one ends up being? Will there be a check-in time?
Sure. Good question. So we would have office hours. Lessons would happen both in a live, asynchronous, and asynchronous setting. We would have additional office hours to provide support for the lesson. So the teacher may or may not be live that specific day, but they would provide a video with content explaining the lesson. And then they would be around and active for support from home. But in terms of a check-in, I think we want to give some flexibility. So there could be certain days where there is a specific time to check in, but I think we also want to leave some flexibility for the remote portion based on the family and other obligations.
And their attendance portion begins at that 12:04 when they're in the building with us. We will also be, I think, a distinction to make from where we were in the spring to where we'll be now is there will be much more feedback. There'll be much more checking in with those students, much like we see in a normal setting. And so we'll have a better gauge of where our students are at with that as well. Yes.
To follow up with what you said, the attendance starts at the noon time period. So for the remote, you're following to make sure they're doing assignments and coming in when they're required to be, like for a Zoom or something like that, but it's not really attendance. The attendance isn't until they're physically in the school.
Our attendance would come when they arrive with us at school, as long as that's approved by Dr. Kusnewski and Isby.
Okay, so
Does
the
that make
remote
sense?
isn't an attendance issue, it's an assignment issue.
It is an assignment issue in making sure that you're doing the things that you should be doing for your learning.
Okay.
I think I would just jump in and clarify, and this goes to both Brook Park and SC Gross. In the model, if a parent elects the hybrid model, we assume the child is in attendance during the time that they're doing their blended, unless the parent calls that child in absent for that half of the day. If a parent calls the child in the morning for the morning session and says they're ill, they have a stomach ache, they're absent that entire day. If they can't participate in the blended learning for that half a day, they could call in sick for that half a day. Likewise, if a parent selects to be 100% blended, the assumption is the child is in attendance unless the parent tells us they are not physically able to complete the assignments on that day, then they're absent.
Yes.
So looking at this, the schedule, social studies is daily, health, wellness, PE is daily. Enrichment is optional, band is optional, Spanish is optional.
So enrichment is only optional. Enrichment would only be optional if you
are taking band or Spanish, right? So
So you do have to take some
so
electives.
that's right. So so you have to enrich yourself in some way, right? You are new to the school board and new to the school district. One day we should sit down and talk about the amazing electives that we have at the middle school. It is a shame that we'll have to shift for this time, but that's what we have to do in these times. But we want our students enriched, and we have the staff to do that, and we have the ability to do that. We know that's really important, and so we're going to do that. But I think that we look at it, and if it's all three, there's going to be some kids that really can't do that. And in our model, when they're with us at school, they're not doing all three of these anyhow. And so we're going to be very cognizant, and we're actually collecting some data on a feedback form that we are going to be sending out that Dr. Kusniewski will talk more about, that actually talks about this so that we can get initial numbers from parents. But enrichment is optional only in the sense that you are not taking band or Spanish. Again, I think as of right now, we would push people away from doing three unless they really felt that they could handle it.
So I guess my other question was, do you have a sense for what percentage of the electives you think you will be able to offer remotely? I know it may be early to know the exact list that you can, but roughly.
So I think it would be a little bit from a lot of them. So we offer art and music, we offer STEAM, we offer consumer ed, we offer history of music. All of these things are going to be taken from and offered as enrichment pieces so that it's not just one of those content areas. I began discussions. One of the things that is, all of it is tragic actually, but the fact that we built an amazing STEAM lab and can't have our students in it. I've started discussions with our provider TinkerWorks to talk about what an at-home model would look like for all of our students, that they would get a kit and that they would be doing STEAM projects at home as an enrichment opportunity. That's early in the discussion, so I don't have anything further, but what I can say is that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that they continue to get those opportunities.
And you said those specialists would have office hours to support students doing it remotely, but they also might be deployed like.
Yeah, so the model is not yet fully developed in if we would have a coordinator running the enrichment or we would rotate through. That's going to be heavily dependent on what we see out of our parent surveys. Good questions. Other questions? Thank you, everyone. Dean Pappas, our Director of Student Services, is next.
Good evening, school board and community members. Can't see me on the screen, but I am a new member of the administrative team, so I would just like to introduce myself and say hello first. And I'd also like to just express my gratitude to our administrative team and all of our hardworking teachers and staff for working so collaboratively with me as a new administrator as we develop these plans. I, as the Director of Student Services, I'm going to be overseeing our special education, 504, and EL programming. So I'll be sharing with you tonight what our tentative plans are for reopening and what that will look like, both at Brook Park and SE Gross. Before I jump into the slide, I want to just share and reiterate that District 95 and the Department of Student Services are committed to ensuring that our students who are eligible for special education, Section 504 plans, and EL services, that they continue to receive the services that they're entitled to, regardless of the reentry plan for this fall. Under the current model, though, that is being presented tonight, we'll be talking about what student services will look like in a blended model. So all students who are eligible for special education, 504, or EL services will continue to follow the regular school schedule as presented today at either Brook Park or SE Gross. Services and supports will be provided to students throughout the school day within their classrooms, and additionally, there will be extended time slots available to students during the 10:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. window each school day. The reason for this extension of the school day is that we understand that students who are eligible for services in the previously mentioned categories, we know that those plans are very individualized, and some students require more and more specific supports than others, which requires time spent outside of the general education setting. By extending this window for students, we're able to provide those individualized supports and services to them each school day. As it is a blended model, we will continue with providing remote learning plans that will act as a supplement to IEPs. And what it'll essentially do is reflect the new and current schedule for the student, the services that will be delivered, and the goals and objectives that will be prioritized during remote portions of the school day. Finally, with regards to meetings, so IEP and 504 meetings, we'll default to a remote platform for holding these meetings. While the ISB and IDPH do permit in-person meetings during phases 3 and 4, we would like to continue to limit the number of individuals entering and exiting the school each day. Though if a parent or a guardian does request an in-person meeting, we are able to accommodate that request by setting up a space in either school that promotes social distancing and adheres to the health and safety protocols and guidelines. Any questions about student services, whether it be special education, 504, or EL, based on this information?
And this sounds like a silly thing, but it says on your last line that it'll be based on parent request for extending into those block times. Is that a case of where the person working with the student may suggest to the parent that it's a good idea that they use that extra time as well? Because to me, if you're making it the parent request, I see one of two things happening. Every parent requesting it because of course their child needs more time, or none of the parents requesting it because they want to get them out of this environment as fast as they can, And so I think that for me, if I had a child, for me personally, I'd be like, well, I want them to have the extra. But is that something that's going to be more guided by the people working with them or more guided by the parent?
Yes, thank you for the good question. I'll clarify, the last point is specific to the meetings. And so parents by request can opt to have an in-person meeting. Now, but I will address your question because it's an important one. In light of all of the changes with going into a remote and blended learning, what we did not want to do and what the guidance from the state and other agencies are that you do not amend or reduce the amount of services that students are entitled to based on their plan, but rather the school teams work collaboratively with parents and administration to find creative ways to offer said services to students throughout the school day, whether it be in person or on a blended platform. So these remote learning plans that I described in the second point will do just that. So a case manager of a student with an IEP or 504 would work with the team and with parents to identify services that really should be worked on live direct instruction during the school day. And then we can also agree on which portions of the service delivery, goals and objectives can be delivered remotely. So obviously, parents and guardians will have the, the final say about how long they'd like their child to stay at school each day, but that extended option will provide students just that, and will provide them the option to get more of the direct services as listed in their IEP.
So the kids who end up staying 10:30 to noon, do they automatically end up being in a cohort, or how do you limit exposure to other cohorts?
This window of time, as Jeff had mentioned with the SEG schedule, so ideally the way that it would work is students who are in the AM cohort would extend their day into this 10:30 to 12 p.m. window to receive any of the additional services that they may need. So it might be that a student receives their related services during that time, like speech or social work or occupational therapy, and then they would leave school based on what their specific plan was. So all of these student plans are going to be very individualized because, again, that is what their IEPs are and 504 plans are as well. So that window is open for students who may need more extended time to receive more intensive services, but it doesn't mean that everyone will be there that whole time.
Thanks for offering that. I think.
And then I should say, and then the PM students or the PM cohort, they would come to school as early as they needed in that window to make sure that they are offered their direct services listed in their plans. Okay. The next slide is going to focus on our early childhood program. And so our early childhood program will be delivered through an in-person AM and PM model, which is consistent with our delivery historically in both our blended and self-contained special education classrooms. We will be initially setting a limit of student enrollment in our blended classroom to 15 students. And we will be setting our limit for our self-contained special education classroom to 10 students. The district is continuing to work with the principal consultants at ISB and continuing to get recommendations and guidance on our student class sizes. Because we are a preschool for all program, there are certain requirements of that program that we meet, and student attendance and class size are part of those components. So we are tentatively setting a limit at 15 students and 10. A waiting list will be developed based on current registrations and student needs as they roll in through the school year. And we will also continue to host ongoing play-based evaluations for special education eligibility throughout the school year. And that will be in response to both parent referral and referrals from the state through the early intervention programs. Early childhood program will utilize larger spaces and outdoor areas to the extent possible. We are very aware that for our youngest learners, that it will likely be a challenge for them to adhere to our new procedures. And we want to be sensitive to that and make sure that we have added precautions and safety and health measures for those students so that we can promote social distancing and safety and health. Finally, with regards to IEP services in early childhood, we will be holding IEP meetings to discuss the delivery of service for students who are unable to attend due to a medical condition or excusal. So if a student is to opt in to a remote alternative or is unable to attend in-person learning due to a medical excusal, that IEP team would convene to discuss the delivery of service and what that would look like remotely. Any questions about early childhood this time? Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to pass it on back to Kathy Cannon to talk to us more about our remote plans.
Thanks, Dean. Okay, so as things continue to change, we know it's very important for us, although we're proposing a blended model, to be working and thinking about a remote plan, knowing that there's a possibility that we could move into remote learning again. So we've spent a significant amount of time reviewing and going through the parent and teacher surveys about how the remote plan went in the spring. And that's important because it helps to drive the decisions that we've made with the changes and enhancements and things that you'll see that'll be different for a more robust remote learning plan for the future. Overall, the feedback from parents was positive about what we did in the spring. We were proud of all of our teachers and staff for the efforts, hard work, and time that went into plan with so little time. But that being said, we now do have more time to plan and make a more robust plan for the fall. So here's what we know will look different in our remote learning blended or standalone model. Teachers will provide new content focused on grade level standards. There will be synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities, which means recorded learning and or live instruction. Grades will count, meaning there'll be accountability for student work, assignments, and participation. There will be a much bigger focus on feedback for all assignments, lessons, activities, and instruction. The district programs will drive the lessons, i.e. STEM scopes for science, Go Math and Big Ideas for math, TCI for social studies. SEL won't be standalone, but will still be a very important part of every day and be embedded throughout our remote learning experiences. And here's what we are planning for with that instruction. So next in the planning phases for remote, because it's still a work in progress, we'll be collaborating with our staff in those committees. We'll be working with subcommittees. We'll be providing professional development. We'll be streamlining our platforms and tools, as we've mentioned kind of throughout our presentation. And we'll be reviewing our spring data to make recommendations and put more thought into the small group differentiated support needed for students in all subjects. So accomplishing this, like I said, with the committees, we met with them last week. They were very inspired, already sharing lots of different ideas about how we can make this possible and better for our students. We are excited about a lot of their ideas. They also are going to we're going to put together some subcommittees to get more voice, more involvement, and teachers working together to create and develop some of these videos to support the learning in the remote setting for parents and for students. So the communication was another, through our feedback, we learned a lot about the communication and streamlining that. So we'll be working on and providing more frequent communication with parents and students. And I guess if there's any other questions, that kind of wraps up, but that's where we're at with remote instruction at this point. Like I said, it's a work in progress. We're going to continue to do this work. Are there any questions at this point on our remote model? Okay. Dean Pappas is going to come back up here for remote student services.
Okay, hello again. So with regards to student services being offered remotely, as you may be aware through the phase 3 and 4 guidance from ISB and IDPH, they do encourage school districts to the extent possible to continue providing in-person learning for students who are eligible for special education, 504, and English language services, at least by making those services available in a remote setting, or I mean, while the school district is in a remote setting. And what we would offer to families who, while in a remote setting, is that they may opt into an in-person model to receive portions of their special education services, or as it relates to their 504 plans or EL services. Students who are eligible in these groups remain eligible during times of remote learning, and we will continue to utilize remote learning plans, which would offer temporary and targeted flexibilities to student plans during remote learning. So in other words, and as I had mentioned in previous slides, those remote learning plans would outline what the delivery of services would look like, what the priority would be in terms of goals and objectives in student plans, and how those services would be delivered. Again, in a remote setting, we would continue to offer parents and guardians the choice to opt in to an in-person model. So students could technically walk in and receive their small group reading instruction, or they can walk in to receive their speech and language services or social work services here at school. And again, the priority being is that ISB and the Department of Health agree that students who are eligible for these supports benefit from a direct learning or a direct instructional model to benefit from their services. Yes.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, parents can opt for remote learning, but then just for the sake of the IEP, the small group instruction, but everything else would be handled remotely for the student. Like, you know, the extra minutes.
Right. Their general education courses that the students are enrolled in would continue to be provided remotely in the case that the school district was going remote. But the special education services could be offered in person so long as we're able to adhere to the health and safety guidelines. So in phase 3, we're restricted to 10 people in a space, in a classroom. So we could still accommodate our students with special education needs because of the sizes of those classes are less than 10.
Can I ask, what if a parent of a student with an IEP or a 504 initially opts for remote learning, and then they, 2-3 weeks into the school year find like, this is not working, this is too much for my student, like, it's overwhelming, they're not a strong enough self-directed learner yet to be able to handle fully remote. Are they able to reverse that decision?
So as in a general education model, we are working on, and Dr. Kozniewski can add to this, we're working on the logistics of how parents would opt in and out of services. With regards to special education though, and 504 and EL services, if a parent had initially chose or opted into a remote model and then wanted to take advantage of in-person instruction, we would make that available to them because it is in line with the student's IEP or 504 or English language services. So it would likely be facilitated through a brief conference or even an IEP meeting, because we would likely be talking about how the delivery of services would be changing from one setting to the other. Thank you very much. We are all models, and I think next up is Amanda to talk about technology.
Hi, Amanda Pelser, Director of Technology and Innovation. So as you've heard all of my colleagues say, no matter what model we're in, technology is going to be used and needed. And so as you may know, at the start of last school year, we had a device available for every student in 3rd through 8th grade, and we had a 2-to-1 model in K1-2. And since we're moving into
a higher need for technology in either of these models, we have been working since the spring to get a device for every student K through 8. So every student will be assigned a device, whether that they're going to be able to take back and forth to school during at-home learning or remote learning. If a family opts for remote learning, we will work to distribute a device for that student to use at home the whole time. In order to protect the devices that are moving back and forth between home, we've also ordered some always-on cases to try and protect them as best as we can. And to support the use of that technology, we've created a form for students and families to be able to request support for log-on or device support as well. Any questions?
I was reading about the form and the plan. Will you be the only person fielding those?
So we will continue to have a relationship with SinglePath, which is, they're now called DioPath. And we'll have the level 1 support in who will also be fielding those concerns. Any other questions? Okay, I'd like to pass the mic to Jill Johnson, our assistant principal at Brook Park.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we're doing to support the social and emotional wellness of not only our students, but our staffs and our families. So thank you to the board. We were able to hire a new position this year, a behavior specialist. Our behavior specialist does have a background in behavior, social and emotional wellness, mental health, and so we see her as a real asset going into this school year. I'm really depending on her to help us with professional development and to support us in the schools. In addition, you've heard us talk about how social emotional learning is going to be embedded in everything that we do within our buildings. At Brook Park, in our hybrid model, we're going to start our day with a class meeting and social emotional learning lessons. In the remote model, it's also going to be embedded into the work we do. And you heard Gross talk a little bit about how SEL is going to be part of the health curriculum. And so we do have a committee of people that are coming together, staff and teachers that are helping us really work on what this will look like and make it palatable and amenable to what we need to do and how we have to develop and respond. We also are looking at some applications right now so that we can support mindfulness and self-regulation, whether we are in a hybrid model and they're in our building or they're at home. So that's something that we can continue working on. Our professional development for staff is going to be to support that work, as well as how do they support their kids, and then also how do we make sure that teachers are taking care of themselves. That professional development will also be kind of driven by us continuing having conversations with our committee and our teachers and seeing what they need and being responsive to those needs. And then lastly, we do have a district crisis level team. It's made up of administrators, support staff, and teachers. And that group can come together in case if there is something that arises in terms of crisis that we need to respond to. Any questions? All right, then I'm going to give the mic to Dr. Kanuski to finish up the slideshow.
Okay, I promise we're nearing the end of the slideshow. I know it can be a little overwhelming. One thing we wanted to talk about was the communication plan moving forward. So this has been a plan that started last Monday. So this was yesterday. So we were drafting the documents that we're using today. Obviously, today we're developing those further to share with you. But I think the key points I want to make is the communication that's going out tomorrow to our community. The first thing is a short video message from myself to the community, short being about 3 minutes, explaining our process and where we are to date and the decision that's been made to move to a a blended model. The next piece that will be discussed in that video is probably the number one takeaway from what you've heard from our administrators who've made the plan. The choice that a parent makes to participate in either the hybrid model or the remote model is the critical driver of how we organize our remote learning plan. I want to emphasize, because I don't know if we said it or clarified it, it is in our larger document and it's on our 2-page summary, but I know this is probably coming up as a key question. And that is, if I start in the remote learning model, how quickly can I change to the hybrid model if for some reason it's not going well? And the answer is, if you choose to start in the remote model, you are in that model for 9-week periods. And every 9 weeks, you will have the option to enroll back in to hybrid. Conversely, if you start in the hybrid model, you may roll into a remote model with a 3-day notice to the school district. So if you start in remote, you're in it for 9 weeks. If you roll out of blended after 3 weeks, you have 6 weeks left of remote before you can come back. So for those of you that have ever tried to manage a schedule, there is nothing harder than trying to manage a schedule of 950 kids in an elementary building or 400 kids in a middle school, changing classes and arranging class sizes. So the most critical piece is for us to know who is opting in, so to speak, and who is going to be in the hybrid model. To that end, there will be a return to school intent form that is discussed during this short video. The due date for that return to school intent form is Tuesday, July 28th, 1 week from today. We're hopeful that the 45-page document and the 2-page summary will be enough to address questions that our community would have in order to make that decision. If they are not able to make that decision without further clarification, the building principals are available to answer their questions. So we'll put that return in there. It's a survey form, and it will take and gather data for us to use. That same form will also gather data to the extent people would use the right at school childcare options within a blended model. So we would know how many people would want to take access to that if we could provide it. We'll also provide a 2-page summary of the return to school blueprint and the full 45-page return to school blueprint with the appendices. There will be a Google form for follow-up questions to our meeting. Our goal is to be able to categorize those forms by grade band levels. For example, ECE students will be asked to fill out one form so that as we streamline these questions, we can do it by ECE, incoming kindergarten, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, special ed, things of that nature. And then we'll also share a, quote, preparing your child to return document that gives some helpful hints of how to prepare your child to return for school. Thursday and on starts the work of our collaborative efforts with our teachers union and our staff to develop further those instructional models, both for the hybrid model and the remote model. So that kind of takes us moving forward and how we communicate this out to our community. As always, we have to have the end thank you slide, but I will be happy to address any further questions that you have on the plan before I ask the board to take a vote on the plan. Kyle.
When you mentioned the prospect of people switching between the remote and the hybrid, let's say hypothetically somebody, you said 3 days notice in school, switch from in-person to remote.
they'd be shifted to a different cohort more likely than not. Again, it's going to depend on how we can develop the cohorts on how many people have opted out.
As far as the cohorts go, will there be any looking at geographical location of how you form those? With the idea being, you know, a group of, I don't know, got like 5 second graders on my block, tend to be together. Would any consideration be given on creating those classrooms?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. The question is, would geographic location be a consideration to developing cohorts of students? I'm going to ask Mike or Ryan or Kelly.
So in the intent to return form, some of the data that we're collecting from parents are those relationships that they have with others. So as they start to discuss what are they going to do for the half day, you're going to take into consideration that perhaps you have a person that's going to watch your kid for the half day, or it's a transportation issue. We will try our very best to meet those needs. It's why we're asking for them up front, so we're not being retro, going backwards to try to figure out how to do that scheduling. We are going to try to take that into account. It's going to be a monumental task to add. We think that that's important, and we are going to try to make sure that happens. That's the reasoning behind the short turnaround, because we know that this is going to be quite a bit of time to put these groups together. So we need as much time as possible, because there's still only 24 hours in a day. As much as we try. So we are taking that into account, we'll get that up front instead of getting out the back end.
I just clarify for our video audience who might not have heard, the general answer is through that intent to return form, we will gather other data such as sharing of transportation and some other needs that parents have in order to help best develop the cohorts we can. Whether we can do it specifically by geographic location, I'll be honest, would be a monumental task. I don't think it's likely that we would group kids based on their address, but we will base kids to the best of our ability. As always, our administrative team is incredibly flexible when there's a request. We certainly will put siblings in the same section as a default, unless, of course, a parent for some reason doesn't want their siblings in the same AM or PM schedule, and there could be various reasons for that. So I know the team will work hard to meet the needs of the community, but ultimately we will we have to put the groups together.
I think along similar lines, you might have addressed this already, but will parents be able to state a preference for AM versus PM? Like if their work schedule doesn't allow for that accommodation?
Yeah, so we, in the survey, that's one of the questions that we asked. What is your preference and what is your rationale for that preference? We will do the best we can to accommodate AM and PM schedules, but there just will not be a guarantee that you get your preference. And this is not going to be a new process for us. It wasn't that long ago that we were in AM and PM kindergarten, and the amount of time and effort, imagine this, that we spent trying to coordinate AM, PM schedules for 125 students. We're now going to ask them to multiply that by 9. So the monumental task that's in front of the administrative team to develop these groups of students is incredible. So we want to make sure we give them as much time, and I hopefully that the audience who's here and who is viewing us will understand if there's any one thing that you can do to help support District 95, is to complete that form so that we know what your choice is. Know that if the form is not completed, you will automatically default to the hybrid model. I would also want to clarify that if you're choosing to enroll in the remote plan, you are still a District 95 student. You are still required to follow the registration process. You will still be promoted to the next grade. You will still have all of the value of being a District 95 student. You will just get your instruction differently than the students in the hybrid model. You know, we value you as a student and a community member, and we recognize and respect that you make decisions that are best for your family, both in your social and emotional, your health, well-being, and what's good for you instructionally. And we respect that. And this plan was designed to offer as much flexibility to parents as possible. Okay.
Any other questions from anyone?
I'm sorry, you have
I have a comment.
a comment. Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of you, because I know that this has been stressful for parents, and I can only imagine the burden that this has been on all of you, because I know how passionate all of you are about education and making sure that we have just the best for our students. And you guys have been given an impossible task. And so I just wanted to acknowledge all of you, because I think about it at night. I'm like, I just can't imagine being any one of you. It's got to be just excruciatingly hard. So I just wanted to
thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that, you know, with all of the administration here to be able to see you. Thank you for not only putting this all together for us tonight, but your dedication in doing all of this over several weeks. And I can't even imagine the countless hours for all of you here. And if you pass to the faculty, just how thankful we are for all of their help and input and just everything they've done. You know, this is truly what makes all of you unparalleled in the industry and what makes this a very special district. That I couldn't ask for more and better information for us to make a decision. So thank you very much, I think, on behalf of all of us.
Thank you. We appreciate those words.
Okay. If the board has no other questions on the topic, I look for a motion.
I make a motion to approve District 95 reopening plan as presented.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Garvey. Aye. Mrs. McAteer.
Aye.
Mrs. Mulcrone. Aye. Mr. Wood.
Aye.
Mr. Enscher.
Aye.
Mrs. Jordan. And Dr. Witzel.
Aye.
Okay.
We
please.
appreciate your support.
So no other items on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us tonight. And we have a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Thank you very much. Thanks again, Mark.
Yep. Thank you to the community for sharing your evening with us. And that concludes the board meeting, and look for the communication midday tomorrow. Thank you. I don't know.